Shalom, I'm Nama Ru. This is my husband, Rabbi David Ru. And we're talking about the Shmita year. And we're talking today about, well, first I just want to say something. It is a really different life living in Shmita year. Being a Jew in the Holy Land takes a whole different perspective. It takes all kinds of efforts to get your food, to treat it holy, to know what to do. It's like, if you didn't learn it, you would never know. So I feel very blessed. I am so privileged to be living in the Jewish homeland. And these laws apply to me, and these laws are applied in society at large. Kosher food all goes by the laws of Shmita. And we have great rabbis in Israel that help us, keep us focused, guide the production, industrial-sized production of food for the Jewish nation, for the Jews living in Israel, eating the food that we grow in Israel during the 7th year of the 7-year cycle. It has the holiness of the food of the Garden of Eden and of the manna in the desert during the exodus out of Egypt on our way back to the Holy Land. And now we're going to talk today about what are the ways that are permitted for planting during the Shmita year.
Well, I'm not quite sure I'd say it that way. We're going to talk about Gromma. Gromma is causative action, meaning I cause something to happen, but I don't do it myself. Gromma is discussed throughout Halach. It's discussed in terms of damages. Is Gromma b'nizakim chayav or pater, is indirect damage liable or not? And it might depend on how direct and indirect it is, and so on. But there's also a concept of Gromma on Shabbos. And we know, because of the psukim that we've examined, that there are significant comparisons between the laws of Shabbos and Shmita. It's ושבתה הארץ Shabbos laHashem. You will let the land have a Shabbos to God. And Shebeton Tהיה, Laarets, that will be a sabbatical year for the land, and so on. It says lo tizrā and lo tizmor, don't plant and don't prune, both on Shabbos and Shmita, and so on.
The land is God's, and God will provide, so you have faith.
On Shabbos, the Gemara says, lo tase kol melacha, don't do any work. This is the pasuk, of course, in the Seres Dibros. Asiyah hu Asur, hagarmi garama shari. Doing it is prohibited. Causing it is permitted. So the question is a Gromma on Shmita permitted or not? And as we've discussed before, is the law of Shmita essentially that the land has to rest, or that I have to rest from working the land? If the land gets worked, that's not my problem. So from the Arוך, Ashulchan, העתיד, it seems that we could imply that Gromma on Shmita is permitted. So one of the things that used to be done to get rid of worms and other bugs in trees was to light a fire under them, to create smoke, and the smoke would drive away the insects. So the Arוך HaShulchan says, "V'lo ya'shen tachtav kedei sheyamos hatola'as," and you should not cause there to be smoke under the tree so that the worms will die. Afal pi she'eino ose מעשה beguf האילן, even though I'm not doing anything with the tree itself, ele Gromma ba'alma, it's only indirect. Mikol makom, nonetheless, if you're doing it directly under the tree, it's as if I'm working on the tree. Venerally, and it appears to me. So up to this point, he's stating a well-accepted halacha among all the Rishonim. Now at this point, the Arוך HaShulchan goes off on his own. And he says, Te'im ose Ashan harchek miguf ha'ilan. If I make the smoke a significant distance away from the tree, Vashan megil ilan, and there's a steady wind or something, so that the smoke gets to the tree. Umitoch kach mesim hatolaim mutar. And because of this, all the worms that want to get in die, even though I know that when I'm going to light the fire, the fire is going to cause smoke, the smoke's going to cause the worms to die. Nonetheless, he says that should be permitted. So Ritzi Pesach Frank addresses the Arokh HaShulchan. And he says, L'chor yesh ladun b'zay. It would seem that we would have to look into this matter. Dafim timtze lomar de grama lav bechlal halotase. Even if you want to say that grama, the indirect causation, is not within the negative prohibition, Dafim nemar shehalav shel lo tizr'a lo asar zriya begrama. And if you want to say that the negative prohibition of not planting lo tizr'a does not prohibit indirect planting, mishum de מעשה זריעה Asur Torah. It's the act of planting that the Torah prohibited. V'kan hu eino עושה ela grama ba'alma. And I'm only doing something indirectly. I'm loading up the wagon and I'm telling, slapping a whip behind the oxen so they hear the snap of the whip and then they start walking. Akati yesh ladun mikol makom ase ושבתה הארץ יעבור. It still looks as if you're violating the positive mitzvah of that there's supposed to be a sabbatical for the land. ושבתה הארץ שבס להשם. This you're still pretty good. אף על פי שאינו אלא גורם, even though you're only doing it indirectly. Directly or indirectly, the land's not resting. Harihu mushar va'omed lishmor shvisa sadehu. Nonetheless, just like on Shabbos, I have an obligation to let my animal rest. I'm not allowed to lend my animal to someone else that's going to do work with it. So too on Shmita, I have an obligation to make sure my field rests. V'afim eino ela gorem levodas haaretz. Even if I'm only indirectly causing the land to be worked. Lo kayam as say deshavsa haaretz. I have not in this way fulfilled the positive mitzvah of letting the land last. And then he continues off later, and he says, but it seems that because Shmita in our time is only rabbinic in nature, yesh makom ladun zriya ba'agalah shaches bekaron, one can consider the case of a wagon that's pulled by a tractor or oxen. Einu ela sefek d'Rabbanan lekula. It seems to be a rabbinic prohibition that we should be lenient on. The minhag lahalacha concerning this is that if there's another reason to permit it, that it is allowed. For instance, there's the heter mechira involved, or
what's that?
Selling the land to a non-Jew, or any of the other reasons why something might only be rabbinic in nature. Then, if you are planting by grama, by indirect action, it might be permitted. Now, I want to say one other thing by grama on Shabbos, since I started with it. It's very important. If I do X, and X causes the melacha to be done, it's prohibited. If I do X, and X causes Y, and Y causes the melacha to be done, in that case, there might only be a rabbinic prohibition. It really depends upon the nature of it. It's quite complicated. Gramophones work this way. Telephones that are designed for like doctors that may have a necessity to talk on the phone on Shabbos and so on. They're done for such circumstances, but it does not seem that in general we permit something that's a grama on Shabbos. It makes it a rabbinic prohibition in general. There may be some strange circumstances where it is permitted entirely. There are circumstances where, because of the circumstance permitted, like a doctor who has to talk on Shabbos, it's certainly much better for him to do so in a way that only has a rabbinic prohibition than in something that has a Torah prohibition. And there are other extensions. Do not assume, without talking to your Rav, that if something is a grama on Shabbos, it is automatically permitted. Even though the Gemara says it's permitted, it's saying there's no Torah prohibition involved in this. There still may be a rabbinic prohibition. There still may be a prohibition of, as we discussed previously, the Ramban saying if you can do almost everything you do on a normal weekday on Shabbos, but it's not Shabbos. The mitzvah of Shabbos of creating a special atmosphere has been violated by this.
Okay, I have a few questions. Maybe you might not be able to answer all of them, but can I run them
Before
by
you ask,
okay.
if people have questions, they can write them in the comments on YouTube, and I will read them and try and answer them. And then other people might be enlightened by your questions as well.
Okay, good point. So, I know that if something didn't break ground, like a seed didn't break ground into a plant before the Shmita began, then it's forbidden to eat.
We discussed this previously. The Chazon Ish said if you're talking about an entire field, and if in 3 places the plants broke ground, then the entire field is permitted. If you're talking in a garden, which we haven't addressed yet, then it would seem, according to the Chazon Ish, if they're all in one place and 3 of the plants broke, then it would be permitted. If they're scattered in different places in the garden, then each one would have to break the ground.
Okay, so now, for example, last year, my eggplant plants continued to grow after the winter. They had a dormant period and then they continued to grow. So obviously, if they continue to grow the next year, it's permitted. But
if the stalk it's growing from the same stalk.
Yeah, same stalk, right? Not from like seeds that fell. Versus so I guess the same thing may apply to the broccoli. Like the broccoli and the kohlrabi, they actually survived the winter. I thought when they went to seed, they were just going to dry out. But actually, I just let them, I harvested some of the seeds and then I just let them be there. And then they began to grow green again. And actually, there's like branches with kohlrabi bulbs growing on the branches. So obviously we can eat those. But my question is, what about the seeds that fall from those plants? If they don't break ground before Shmita, are they permitted because there's still a living plant?
They are prohibited. We've discussed this again. There's a rabbinic prohibition on anything that plants itself. From Torah law, something that plants itself would be permitted, but because people started saying they were planting at night, and they were saying, oh, these things, it was from seeds that fell, and in fact it wasn't. Therefore, there's a rabbinic prohibition on even things that are planted by themselves if they're not sprouted before Shmita begins.
So, right. Okay, thank you for reminding me. I needed a lot of repetition like we talked about too. So it's a huge adjustment for me to be in Israel during the Shemitah year. I can't just be the guerrilla gardener that lets the weeds grow. Everything has to be separated, even when it's not Shemitah, right? Okay, thank you.